Who is the Truck Industry Council? Well, it was formed in 2001 and previously we were part of the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, the Commercial Vehicle Committee of that body, and it was deemed that the TIC needed its own voice in terms of issues surrounding trucks. So 10 years ago was formed, and it represents all of the heavy vehicle manufacturers on both policy and technical issues. So my role specifically is to represent the industry on Australian design rules and other standards and regulations as they apply around the country. The TIC has a positioning statement saying today's trucks, safer, greener, essential. And you can see that first word, safer, and we're here today mainly to talk about safety. TIC has 12 full members representing 17 truck brands and 3 associate members representing engine and component suppliers. So I'm sure you'll recognise most of the truck brands on the screen there. A couple of fairly recent ones who are members of the council, Hyundai Trucks have come on board this year with their light-duty trucks, and Photon down the bottom there are being introduced by the Western Star people. That's the first of the Chinese truck brands. But there's many established players there on the screen, all of whom are heavily involved in Truck Industry Council. I put it to you that the Australian truck fleet is too old. As of 31st of March last year, which is the latest statistics released only just last month, the average age of all trucks registered in Australia is nearly 14 years, 13.7 to be exact. In particular, the heavy rigids were up above 15 years. And what that means is that we're way higher than the average age of trucks in other markets. The likes of Europe, most of Western Europe, the UK, Japan and the US have an average age truck fleet of only 8 years. And so at nearly 14 years, we really have some work to do. What that means is that the latest safety features, the latest environmental measures are not being introduced across a broad cross-section of the industry as fast as they are in other markets. And that therefore represents in generally higher fatalities and the like. We've also got a growth in the number of trucks registered shown there. In the last 5 years, going from 458,000 units to 536,000 units in 2010, up about 17%, or roughly in line with gross domestic product. And a recent report from the BITRE in Canberra, the Road Freight Task forecast, is suggesting that by 2030, the road freight task overall will increase by 80%. And that's about 2.7% year on year for the next 22 years. But interestingly, up by 170% for interstate movements. So they're forecasting that interstate traffic will grow disproportionately, and that's 4.7% year on year. To counter that, trucks are getting larger on average. The trend is towards larger capacity trucks for any given task. In the past 5 years, for example, articulated trucks in general increased in number by about 18%, but those with a gross combination mass of over 60 tonnes, so we're talking the prime movers that are B-double and prime mover and road train capable, increased by nearly 50% in that 5-year period. And there's now more than 40,000 of those vehicles on the road in Australia today. So now more than half of all articulated trucks have a gross combination mass of greater than 60 tonnes, which is a real change in the landscape. Similarly, in the past 5 years, the trend has been towards a faster growth in larger capacity rigid trucks. So for rigid trucks greater than 20 tonnes gross combination mass, they increased by 30% in the last 5 years to 83,000 units, whereas those less than 20 tonnes increased by only 14%. So you can see the trends. And the pictures there show a graphic example of some of the changes. We've got a 3-axle concrete truck moving to a 5-axle concrete truck, and your typical old model, the 5-axle semi or the 18-wheeler becoming a typical B-double today. Yet, despite the growth in numbers, the crash statistics generally show a downward trend. Now, we're going from December 99 to December 09 here, but the trend there for articulated trucks involved in a fatality, this is national, shows that we've gone from around 160 crashes a year down to about 120, which is a trend in the right direction. And for heavy rigid trucks being involved, we're looking at around 80 a year. So is this enough? That trend is in the right direction, but as Gary said, we still have a number of fatal crashes, nationally around 200 involving heavy rigid and articulated trucks. And that's 200 crashes that could be avoided in the future with a combination of safer trucks, safer operating practices, and safer infrastructure. We all need to play our part. When we look at the year of manufacture, I told that the fleet's too old, and we focus perhaps on pre-1995 trucks. We can see that there are still 206,000 or so pre-1995 model trucks on the roads today and registered. That's about 39% of the total fleet. And these trucks are getting on a bit now, 16 plus years old. These trucks don't actually have to comply with any emission standard. So these were on the road before the advent of ADR 70, which is our first significant exhaust emission standard. And they're also trucks that have very few of the safety features that we've come to expect today on new trucks. And certainly they don't have any of the safety features that you'll see, the advanced features you'll see demonstrated today. And this is true. Older trucks are not safer trucks. They don't have ABS. They don't feature front underrun protection. The ergonomics and the noise levels are far worse than the average modern truck today. They don't have automated transmissions, so it's a lot busier for the driver. Most of them don't have lap sash seatbelts, and we've come to expect that from cars since the 70s, but in trucks it's a relatively recent thing. And older trucks are typically not always maintained as well because they're 16 plus years old and they're getting on. So looking towards the future, today's trucks are safer than ever. There's advanced features on our new trucks, and you'll see many examples on show today. The point that we want to make very clear is that these features are not able to be retrofitted in general to older trucks. So, and they are often expensive. So how do we go about bringing them to the market to the truck fleet faster? I'll just give you a couple of examples. And as I said, I won't steal the thunder of our panel because they've got a fair bit to talk about. But radar detection of road signs is something that this one's from Hino Trucks, which just shows the amazing technologies that is becoming available. Detects the yaw rate and steering angle of the truck and keeps it well and truly on the road. ESP or ESC, generally known as stability control, received a lot of publicity of late in Victoria because Victoria has brought mandatory ESC for passenger cars into play this year ahead of the national rule. It's not a very common feature on trucks, but it is coming in. And ESP on an articulated vehicle, as you can see from the pictures, will be able to correct understeer and oversteer under many situations, thus avoiding a lot of rollovers and crashes. Brake assist is another example. And this is a feature which can actually bring the vehicle to a stop without the driver's input on the brake pedal. And that can actually prevent so many collisions that would otherwise have occurred. So there's just 3 examples. But the problem, of course, is we aim for 0 fatalities and 0 crashes, and we need to accelerate adoption of safer and greener new trucks. We also need to accelerate infrastructure improvements because so many of the modern technologies that are being introduced rely on communication between the vehicles and the roads, and so intelligent transport systems are just on the horizon, but they need a lot of investment. We also need to promote advanced driver training, and I do recognise the simulator that's out there in the car park. So by accelerating adoption of safer, greener trucks, we believe that won't happen fast enough without government involvement. We need to modernise the truck fleet. We need to focus primarily at this stage on the 200,000 or more trucks that are much older than 16 years, and they don't comply with any emission standards, they don't have many of these safety features. We need to look at incentives for safer, greener trucks. These incentives would then reduce the capital cost and perhaps operating costs of owning a new truck through the likes of investment allowances that we've seen in the recent past, through incentives for adopting the latest measures, whether they be safety or environment measures, through perhaps lower registration costs for safer, greener trucks. These things need to be introduced by the governments. So in conclusion, our statistics show that the Australian truck fleet is very old by world standards, almost 14 years compared to 8 years in the other Western economies. And to cope with the growing freight task, the trend is towards larger capacity trucks. Older trucks are certainly not as safe as new trucks. And to move towards the goal of zero fatalities, we need to accelerate the adoption of new trucks. And that means government incentives are required. And of course the TIC, among other bodies, are investigating ways and working with government to bring these into play.